Hey everybody, welcome back. I think everybody loves a good comedian. I definitely love a good comedian, comedy movies, and I wanted to talk about Rodney Dangerfield. He's been passed away for almost 20 years now, but I gotta say, him and like John Candy, uh, Sam Kinison, but Rodney Dangerfield, I think, is what he's got the funniest lines I've ever heard. It's like I wonder how long it took him, how many years he spent coming up with all these funny lines, but it is just I don't know if he had somebody else help him come up with these lines, but regardless, I mean, as comedy, it is just absolute fucking genius. Now, he's been in a lot, Rodney Dangerfield was in a lot of things, but when I think of Rodney Dangerfield, number one movie that comes to mind is Caddyshack. And let's say number two would be Back to School. And then number three would be The Ladybugs, where he's coaching the girls' soccer team. So I'm going to start off The Ladybugs here. It was made in 1992, and basically the plot is I think he's not even engaged. He's trying to get a promotion because he thinks getting a promotion it'll impress his girlfriend. She's divorced. She's already got like a 11, 12, I think a son that's maybe late junior high, early high. I think he's maybe like in seventh or eighth grade, maybe a freshman in high school. So he's looking to impress his girlfriend. So he thinks if he gets this promotion, that he'll be more likely convince her to marry him. And then she's got a son, and his boss is the coach of this girl's soccer team. So he ends up like he doesn't really know what he's doing. He lies to his boss, tells him that he was this big soccer player in high school. He doesn't know shit about soccer. I don't know shit about soccer. I'd be fucked too, just like him. So he's just like, he keeps saying, man, that guy kissed the boss's ass. That guy gets funny. From the beginning, I think some woman that was like the boss, I think she was the boss's assistant. She's like, oh, what position did you play? And he's like, well, you know, I was a kicker. You know, I mean, everybody in the fucking team kicks the ball. It was a funny line. So yeah, he puts his former son-in-law on the team, dresses her up as a girl, in the hopes that he'll bring a winning team. His yeah, he ends up getting a position as the coach of the girls' soccer team, and he's like starts off losing, and his boss is like so pissed at him. Then he's worried oh he's gonna be fired, and so he ends up getting a book about how to coach a soccer team, and there's like all these tips in there. And then he's like, oh my god, the number one rule: anybody who coaches a girls' soccer team is absolutely crazy. And he's got this friend of his, this woman. And she's like, oh, do you know anything about soccer? He's like, not much. But he's like, I sure have a lot of balls. And then he opens the back of his minivan. All these soccer balls come out. It was a funny line. And he's like rehearsing how he's going to propose to his girlfriend at the beginning of the movie. He's driving along. He's got the windows down. And he's talking about himself. And some guy pulls up alongside of him at the red light. And he says, his name's Chester, and this guy, asshole, says to him, Chester, to me, you look like a big, giant asshole. And he says, oh, well, if I'm an asshole, there's a reason for it. He's like, you're contagious. And him and his wife go to look at a house that they might buy. It's like a two-story house, and I guess he says something like, "Oh no, these houses are too close together. Neighbors will hear us making loud, passionate love." And she says, like, oh, well, this is like, a two-story. I haven't found too many two-stories in our price range. Like, oh, that's exactly the problem. We don't want a two-story. That's exactly the problem. You get one story, you move in, and you get the other story. And then when he's trying to teach his future stepson about how to treat women, how to act like a woman, I think he gets him a dress, he puts a wig on him, and he says, oh, imagine women like a big bed of flowers, and then they pass by this freaky girl, like a punk rocker, and he says, oh, of course, there's a weed here and there. Let's see. And then he's coaching this girls' soccer team, and there's this one little girl. She's really good. She just cannot handle she's really smart, and she's really good at all parts of the soccer, but she cannot, dribbling the ball is a big part of it, and she just cannot keep control of the ball. And she's like in the, dribbling the ball in like the weeds, the side, like 100 yards to the side of the field, and he calls her out. He's like, you're in a different time zone. And then they go to play this one team, and this coach is like absolute psycho. He's got them, he's like a drill sergeant. He's yelling at them, and they get a goal within like the first 10 seconds of the game. He's like, oh, you took you 10 seconds to score. You call that hustle? And Rodney Dangerfield is like, oh, the war is over. He's like, get new parts for your head. And then there was another game that they were playing against this real ugly woman who was a coach. They had her made up to look like an ugly woman. And she's like, you're a loser, Chester. And he said something like, oh, he's talking to his boss. Like, oh, I bet when she walks in a room, mice jump on chairs. And he's like, no wonder they call so many people two-faced. And he's like, if she had one face, you only see the other side. And then he said something that at the end, they end up beating her, but she's throwing like lawn chairs on the field. And he said, oh, I should take you back to the zoo. They'll thank me for returning you. Let's see. And then he said something about a one-legged man and she's like, oh, we got a chance. His friend says, oh, we got a chance to win the game. He's like, oh, yeah, about as much chance as a one-legged man in a kicking contest. And this woman was, I guess there was a black girl on the team, and he said, oh, we should have her be the leader. You know, we put that black girl as a leader. You know, she was a black woman too. And she's like, you know, we're the best at sports. And he starts talking about, oh, yeah, best at sports. He's like, tennis, badminton, water polo. He starts like naming out like all these sports that like white people dominate, and then that like, you know, football or basketball, you know, soccer. I think he's named hockey too. So I think that's all for Ladybugs. And one of his most famous, when we get to Back to School, and one of his most famous lines, I don't think he said in the movie, or maybe he said at the end when he graduated from college and goes back to school with his son, even though he's like this huge, you know, like rich businessman, sells like he's got his own clothes. He's still, you know, tall and fat, and he has clothes for bigger guys, tall and heavy guys, and he calls them, that's the name of his clothing line, Tall and Fat. But at the end, he says, yeah, I finally got some respect. That's his most famous line, is, I get no respect. And he ends up having the hots for his English teacher. And he tells her, he says, yeah, she offers to tutor him. He's just like so out of touch with all these subjects in school. He's, you know, a businessman, but he doesn't really know anything about anything else. I don't even think he graduated from high school. But he says, yeah, I've always been attracted to teacher. His English teacher is tutoring him. And he says, oh yeah, I've always had a thing for teachers, always been attracted to teachers. He's like, I had a crush on a high school English teacher once. He's like, I sent her a love letter. She corrected it. And then I think he goes out, they end up going out on a date. He takes her out on a date, and he has like this limo driver that takes him everywhere. A friend of his, this guy Lou, who's like a chauffeur, his bodyguard, that basically does everything for him. So he comes back, his English teacher, she had a date with her boyfriend, or this guy, this other English professor, he's a business economics professor she's been seeing. And he's like, I don't know, waxing his car. They end up coming back from their date, they're both like totally shit-faced. And then he's like, oh, we were supposed to go out to dinner, and he's like waxing his car or polishing or something like that. And then he's like, oh, Rodney Dangerfield's like, oh, you do a good job. He's like, what do you charge for big cars? And then he has like a new infomercial for his business, so he tells his friend Lou, he's like, hey, Lou, did you see the new infomercial? He's like, oh, yeah, I saw it. And he's like, do I like fatten it? And he's like, yeah, you can lose a couple pounds. And he rolls his eyes like, oh, I gotta get bigger actors. It's funny, his infomercial, he's like, oh, you want to look skinny, you want to look slim, you hang out with fat people. He's got like all these people who are like fatter than him, and he's still saying that he's got to get bigger actors. His friend tells him, oh, you could lose a few pounds. Oh, I got to get bigger actors. And then he was pissed off at his wife. Him and his wife end up getting like divorced, on the verge of divorce, and he's mad at her. They're having this party at their house, and he's like totally not up for it, you know, entertaining at all. And this woman is wearing like this dark green dress, and then she's like, oh, his wife is like, oh, I love your dress, Raquel. It's such a lovely shade of green. He's like, don't you think so, Thornton? That's his name in the movie, Thornton Mellon. And he's like, oh yeah, lovely. He's like, if that dress had pockets, that you look like a pool table. And then he says, oh, you should try my Tall and Fat store. It's like, no offense. And before this party, him and his wife are just totally getting into it. She's like, oh, he's just getting changed, and he threw his clothes, I forget the name of the chair it was. He threw his clothes on this chair, and she's like, can you please not throw your clothes on whatever kind of chair it was? And then he's like, how come all of our furniture has to have names? And then she's like, you have no taste, Thornton. He's like, oh yeah, that's right, I married you, didn't I? And she's like bitching about her, she can't find anything to wear. She's like, I have absolutely nothing to wear. He's like, oh yeah, right. You've got a whole closet full of nothing to wear. And she's like, look, Thornton, I don't have time to argue. Our friends will be here any minute. She's like, they're my friends, so I'd like to keep it that way, so just do me a favor. Behave yourself tonight. He's like, oh, don't worry. As long as the roast beef is cooked right, they'll be back. So then he decides to divorce his wife, and his friend Lou's like, oh, what happened there? He's like, I'll tell you what happened. I got rid of Vanessa. I feel like I just got paroled. And he's like, Lou, he's like, pack our bags. He's like, we're going up that college to see my son. So then they go to see his son, and I guess his son had lied to him, said that he was in like this big fraternity, and turns out he's just in the dorms. And he said he was on a diving team, which he isn't. And he's like, oh, I can explain that. I can explain that. He's like, okay, son, explain it to me. He's like, well, I lied. Oh, that explains it, huh? He's like, Jason, you don't lie to me. You lie to girls. And then Robert Downey Jr. in his young days, this movie was made back in 1986, but Robert Downey Jr., I think it was back in the days during his drug use, and he actually has like blue hair, and he's like, oh, yes, this is my roommate Derek, and then he's like, oh, is that your real hair? He's like, what do you think? And he's like, oh, I think you're trying to get back at your parents. That's what I think. And then his son takes him around the college campus. Like, oh, so this is college, huh? He's like, when I used to dream about going to college, this is exactly how I pictured it. And his son is like, wait a minute, Dad, when did you dream about going to college? And he's like, oh, when I used to fall asleep in high school. And that part at the end when his son ends up making the diving team, and they needed like another eligible diver, and he lied to the diving coach about being this big-time diver back in the day, so the diving coach is like trying to get him to substitute. And his friend Lou's like, oh, come on, show him what you got, come on. He's like, oh, God, please, no. He's like, with the shape I'm in, you could donate my body to science fiction. And he's buying his son books. It's next semester, and they're in a bookstore, and he's like, oh, because, used books, underlined books, they're already, been used, they're cheaper. And he's like, oh, what's with the underlined books? He's like, what's with used books? He's like, they've already been read. And his son's like, oh, yeah, and you know what? They've already been underlined, too. And Rodney Dangerfield like, oh, yeah, that's the whole problem. The last guy that underlined them, he could have been a maniac. Oh. And then when he first gets a crush on the teacher, he's like, oh, what a woman. And his son is like, Dad, she is the teacher. He's like, oh, yeah, I know. I like teachers. You do something wrong, they make you do it over again. And then he was in this economics class, and he's just like, talking about like bribes and all the stuff that's really not like part of the legitimate business world, and it was funny, it gets to the point where he just goes on, and all the kids in the class start taking notes from Rodney Dangerfield, and the teacher's like, okay, that's plenty enough, that's fine enough, that's far enough. He's like, maybe bribes or kickbacks on how you do business, that they're not part of the legitimate business world, and they're certainly not part of anything I'm teaching in this class. He's like, we'll be concentrating on finance a little later in the term. He's like, for the time being, let's just concentrate on construction costs, shall we? And then Sam Kinison, he's passed away too. He was a funny comedian, but he's like a history professor, and he's talking about Vietnam, and he's talking about actually being there, because he's like, oh, does anybody have any idea why we pulled our troops out of Vietnam? And this girl gave this big rehearsed answer, and Sam Kinison starts talking about, oh, I'd like to believe that, but I was there. I wasn't here in a classroom hoping I was right thinking about it. He was talking about his actual experience, and he was like screaming in this girl's face and answered, and then Rodney Dangerfield was, hey, professor, take it easy, will you? Hey, these kids, they were children at the time, and me, he's like, I'm not a fighter, I'm a lover. And Sam Kinison is like, oh, well, I didn't know you wanted to get involved in the discussion, Mr. Helper, but since you volunteered to help me, you can help me, okay? And he starts asking him some history questions, and he's like, good answer. I really like the way you think. He's like, I'm going to be watching you. And he walks away, and Rodney Dangerfield was talking to the kids in the class, like, wow, good teacher. He really seems to care. And then he rolls his eyes, like, about what? I have no idea. And then he talked about really not liking the English professor, and his son's like, well, you better cool it with him, because you know what he knows how to do? He knows how to flunk you. He's like, flunk me, flunk him. And then this woman, there was actually this writer, Joyce, I guess it was a guy, and he's bullshitting his English professor. He says, oh, they try to understand, I don't have a background for this. He's like, the high school I went to, they asked a kid to prove the law of gravity. He threw a teacher out the window. He's like, I tell you what. He's like, why don't we discuss Joyce over dinner? Which Joyce is a guy. He's like, she's my favorite writer. So then she's like, okay, I have some free time tonight. Why don't you drop by around 8 o'clock? Let me give you my address. And then she gives him the address, and he's like, oh, what penmanship. And at the beginning, when he went to the fraternity house that his son lied to him about, and he's talking to his friend Lou. He's like, oh, he's like, oh, the Greek letters. And then he's like, do you know what that says? And then Lou's like, oh, don't you know any Greek? And he's like, oh, the only Greek I know is, he mentions this Greek guy he knew. He's like, you remember him? He had an ugly wife, he had a great ugly wife, 4 ugly kids, and great coffee. Here, stay here. I'm going to check it out. And then at the end, he talks about the kids that are graduating. He's like, oh, before you go out to, I think he was a freshman, and oh yeah, he hadn't graduated yet, and he was a freshman, and I said, oh yeah, he's the youngest freshman to ever give this speech. And he says, oh, before you go out, he's telling these seniors that just graduated, he's like, before you go out into the real world, my only advice to you is don't go. He's like, it's rough out there. Move back to your parents' house. Let them worry. Move back in with your parents. Let them worry about it. He's like, you got to watch out for number 1, but whatever you do, don't step to number 2. So I think that's all I have for Ladybugs and Back to School. And now I'm going to go with Caddyshack, which I think was one of my favorite performances of him. And at the beginning of the movie, him and this Asian guy go to this Bushwood Country Club. They get invited by a couple members. And this guy, he's with this Asian guy, Mr. Wang. And he tells this guy as they're walking in, he's like, now, Wang, I think this place is restricted, so don't tell anybody you're Jewish. Okay, fine. And Ted Knight, he was big on Mary Tyler Moore show, Ted Knight, and he plays this real big shot judge in the movie, and he's got this white hat on. Rodney Dangerfield is like asking for all this stuff in the store for him and his friend, and he's like, oh, this is the worst looking hat I ever saw. He's like, if you buy a hat like this, I bet you get a free bowl of soup, huh? And he sees Ted Knight with a hat on. Ted Knight kind of rolls his eyes, and Rodney Dangerfield is like, oh, don't worry, it looks great on you, though. And then Rodney Dangerfield turns his head, and you can see him like rolling from like the side. You see him rolling his eyes, and then when they're teeing off, Ted Knight got rid of the hat. He's like, hey, Whitey, where's your hat? And Ted Knight is just like taking forever to tee off. He's like waggling the club head. He's like, come on, let's go while we're young. I actually saw that on a golf course once. I don't know if these guys were joking around, if they were really mad, but there were guys in front of them and some guy in a tee. He's like, come on, let's go while we're young. I wonder if he was joking around or if he was really mad at the group in front of him. It's pretty funny. And there was one part where Rodney Dangerfield, he like dropped an anchor into Ted Knight's boat, and the boat's got like all this water damage on it. It was like a brand new boat that he was just showing off, and Rodney Dangerfield's like, hey, you scratched my anchor, and Ted Knight's like crying over his brand new boat he was just sporting out, showing off. And at the beginning of the movie, there's all these caddies working with Rodney Dangerfield and his friend Mr. Wang and the 2 other guys. And this one caddy says, hey, Mr. I forget what his name is in the movie. He's like, you want the driver? The club, the driver you tee off with. I say, no, he's not my type. Hey, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. Yeah, give me the driver. And him and this other guy, Anthony, they're like Italian kids, and they're brothers. And Rodney Dangerfield's like, oh, you guys are brothers, huh? Wow, is this a family business? He's like, for Italians, they say this is skilled labor. And the other older brother's like, no, actually, I'm a rich millionaire. My doctor thought it would be good if I got out and carried golf clubs a couple times a week. He's like, oh, you're a funny kid, huh? He said, what time you due back in Boys Town? And then there's a banquet part, which I thought was the funniest part of the movie. And he's just like there with his friends, and he's just like taking over the whole conversation. And he made a joke about real estate. He says, oh, nowadays I just stick to real estate. If you own anything other than that, now these days, he's like, yeah, these days I just stick to real estate. If you own anything other than real estate these days, you pretty much own nothing but a popcorn farm, I guess, talking about cornfields. And he's talking about all these old people who are looking at him with like these faces, like these puzzled looks on their faces. And he says, he hit the one old guy, he's like, hey, the graveyard's 3 blocks to the left, okay? And then he says, oh, the dance of the living dead. I've never seen dead people dance before. And then he sees one couple, they're like all over each other. He's like, oh, you two ought to get a room. And then he sees a big couple dancing with each other. He's like, oh, you two ought to get a warehouse. And then he was joking with that one guy, Tony, and he says, hey, can you make a bull shot? He's like, yeah, can you make a shoe smell? He's like, oh, real funny. Here, take this for yourself, okay? He tips him, and then they don't show the woman, but he's like, oh, man, look at that one. The last time I saw a mouth like that, he had a hook in it. And he was complaining about the food. He tips the waitress. Hey, Doll, get us another round of drinks and take this for yourself, okay? Gives her a nice tip, and he's like, tell the cook this is low-grade dog food, okay? He's like, wow, I had better food at the ball game, and I think they're eating prime rib or steak or something like that. And he says, oh, yeah, this piece of meat still has marks on it from where the jockey was hitting it. And then they're playing golf, I think, that afternoon, and he was telling some other people he was playing, the group that he was playing with, boy, I tell you, he's like, country clubs and cemeteries, he was looking to buy this country club and sell it, build homes there. And he says something like, oh, yeah, I tell you, country clubs and cemeteries are the biggest wasters of real estate. He's like, especially cemeteries, like dead people, they don't have to be buried nowadays. And then he's like totally bullying Ted Knight the whole movie. I think when he's teeing off, he's like, oh, I bet you slice it into the woods, $100 or $1,000 or something. Yeah, I think he says $100. And he says, oh, gambling's illegal at this country club, sir, and I never slice. He ends up slicing it right in the woods. And he goes, damn. And he's like, okay, fine, you can owe me. He's like, I owe you nothing. And then at the end, the 18th hole, he's got like this real short putt. It's like 2 or 3 feet. And he's like, oh, now if I could just make this one. And he's like, everybody kind of chuckles. And sure enough, he misses. Rodney Dangerfield comes up. He's like, hey, his name's Judge Smales. He's like, hey, Smales, $1,000, you missed that putt. He's like, of all the nerve. And he's like, and he goes, and sure enough, he misses the putt, and everybody from the country club gathers around, and sure enough, he misses. Oh, now later on at the banquet, hey, how about that grand you owe me? He's like, Captain Hook, how about that grand you owe me? Oh, that's fine, don't worry about it, I was just kidding around. And then he was making, he's like, oh, this is your wife, huh? Oh, yeah, lovely wife, well, I'm a wonderful woman. He's like, I bet you were something before electricity, huh? And where was some other, oh yeah, then there's this one guy, he's a bishop. He's like, hey, how you doing, Rabbi? And then he hit some guy, oh yeah, Judge Smales, he hit him in the nuts with his tee shot. He's like, four, hits him right in the nuts. He's like, oh, I should have yelled 2. And then at the last part, then towards the end of the movie, Rodney Dangerfield totally sucks at golf, and he bets him $80,000. I think you start off with $40,000, but he doubles it after 9 holes. He's like $80,000, double or nothing. And he says, oh, why did I double it? I tell you, I should have stayed home and played with myself. So yeah, that's all I got on Rodney Dangerfield. I mean, he's good in everything. I've never seen him in anything. Meet Wally Sparks, Main 97? That was also another movie that was funny. I haven't seen that for a long time, but I remember there was one part of that movie where he's in the shower and the water's cold, and I guess his dick is shriveled up, and this woman is talking to him while he's in the shower. He had to share something so important with him. He's like, oh, were you trying to prove little things mean a lot? I got to see that movie again. I haven't seen that movie for over 20 years, but that was another funny movie of his. But yeah, when I think of Rodney Dangerfield, I think of Caddyshack, The Ladybugs, and Back to School. So yeah, those are my... Oh, one more thing I wanted to mention. This is another funny part. No, not a movie, but you gotta, if you love Rodney Dangerfield, type in Rodney Dangerfield on The Tonight Show 1980 with Johnny Carson. But yeah, there's so many funny lines in that. But one of his funny lines, like, oh yeah, I don't smoke anymore. He's like, except after sex. That's the deal I made with my wife. He's like, he pulls a pack of cigarettes out of his suit. You guys see this pack of cigarettes here? I had this for the last 5 years. And my wife, I'm really worried about her. She's up to 3 packs a day. So yeah, that's all I have on that. I love Rodney Dangerfield. Those are the 3 movies that come to mind when I think of him. You love Rodney Dangerfield? Yeah, check out everything you can. You won't be disappointed. He has never been in anything that was shit. Great actor, great comedian. So comment, like, share, subscribe, and I'll see you all real soon in another great video. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend. Bye.